Welcome to Rich Conversations. Today is a highly insightful conversation. It was such a pleasure to talk to Johnny Endrihs. We cover a number of different topics, a lot of different topics. His experience serving our country in the Marines, cybersecurity, big tech, and the issues facing our country in the digital world of the 21st century. But we also talk about fashion, gaming, and embarking on a journey of self-discovery and improvement. I'm proud to be able to share this with you. You can follow Johnny on Instagram at Endo2Dapper. Let's begin. All right, so I have Johnny Endrihs here, and this, I think, will be a really exciting podcast episode for listeners. The first question I have is, you were in the Marines. What was your experience like in the Marines?
Well, it was very illuminating for me because I had my grandfathers were in the Navy, right? And
Okay.
everybody that was telling, when I was looking at going into the military, I got told at a very young age, like, you go to college, you do the military, either one you pick, but you know what I mean? That was kind of how it was laid out to me at a very, very young age. And as I was kind of looking at things, everybody told me to go into the Air Force because I was really into computers. And I didn't really like that approach. I had an uncle who was in the Army, but I didn't have a good relationship with him. And so I didn't have a high viewpoint of the Army.
Okay.
And my grandparents were in the Navy, and I didn't want to just go in the Navy like them. Nothing wrong with their service or anything. I'm very proud of their service. They both actually did 30 years
Wow.
in the Navy. So it was just one of those things, like, what can I do? And it just happened to be that the Marines were, the most badass outside in looking at the time. And I was very lucky in that it just really helped me build leadership, build confidence, build discipline and order within myself. And, I was kind of one of those quintessential, like, high energy kids, very
Okay.
low attention span. And so, doing things like getting off a medication before, 2 years before I signed up, so that, because I knew if I am trying to go into the military, I can't have these things holding me back.
So what do you mean by that?
Well, okay, so as you are starting to, talk to recruiters and things like that, they're making you aware of, what is expected in the military. And so one of the quintessential like things you have to contend with being in the military is that you have to be prepared. At any moment in time, you could be called to serve your country, or to go somewhere or do something. Somebody's going to ask you to do something, and you need no questions asked, just start doing it immediately. And so if you have to stop and take your medication, if you have to think about the things that, we kind of look at in civilized society as like, oh, this is just, getting your coffee in the morning. And like, it's like, no, you need
As I'm
you need to
drinking my
be, you
coffee
need to be
now.
dressed in the morning. You need to be shaved in the morning. And other than that, you need to be prepared for battle, So it's just kind of one of those things. As I was looking to have that outlook on my life, I wanted to ensure that, I could figure these things out and actually do it without feeling like these things were a crutch or because,
Dependent on anything else.
right, exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. So, I mean, that really kind of really was more the entry process,
Yeah.
but the military, I mean, I did 4 years right at 18.
Okay.
And I was lucky enough to be in communications, which kind of set the tone for my career. Because I started off doing computers early in high school, and then I didn't actually get a computer-oriented job when I first got in the Marine Corps. So I had to kind of like lobby the instructors at the schoolhouse to let me be in the what's called like data communications section, so that I could be on computers. And I was successful in doing that and actually attained a certification in the process. And then that, kind of carried out through my career.
Really? So when you were, before you went in the Marines, were you kind of thinking to yourself you wanted a career in computers of some sort? So then you went into the Marines and then figured out how you could pursue that from it, or
Yeah, so I was like 13 or 14 when I really started like taking apart computers and putting
okay.
computers together. And then that kind of like slowly, started hanging out with more friends and then started playing video games. And so it was like I was learning computers and I knew that I had this huge interest, and then it was served by, learning Photoshop and learning how to build computers for friends and learning how to, jailbreak phones and like just all these different array of like computing things that I was doing. I was like, I definitely want to work on computers long term in my life. And so when I was going in, I wanted to make sure that I was going to have that be, supporting what I was trying to do. So looking back, like I definitely don't have any regrets about what I did. The one caveat that I would say is like I didn't have enough experience or guidance early on to
Okay.
differentiate like what a top secret clearance versus like a secret clearance really nets you in terms of benefits. But that
So
being said, like
what's a top clearance versus what was the other one? The
a secret clearance, yep. So a
yeah.
secret clearance, I mean, you can have very little background check. I mean, they'll do a
Okay.
background check, right? But they don't really pour over who your relatives are or anything like that to get a secret clearance. And that basically means that you can handle systems that handle secret information. And you can be around secret information and be trusted, right? A top secret security clearance is obviously a higher level of a security clearance, and therefore the types of information you have access to, the types of skills that you need to have, and the type of background that you need to be. They don't have like fresh Russian immigrants with a background in cybersecurity getting a top secret clearance, anytime soon,
So
right? So
how deep are these like background checks?
they're pretty deep. I actually have a lot of friends in the intelligence community, and I mean they figure out who your relatives are. They question you on like where they've been, and they kind of look over like a couple decades worth of your time and your family's time to ensure that you don't have any ties that could potentially create conflicts of interest for the materials that are available in that clearance.
So how many people in the US have this clearance? Or I
That's a
suppose
good
there's different
question.
levels, right? But
That's a good question. I'm not 100% sure what that
yeah.
number looks like. The intelligence community is a small community to begin with.
Yeah.
So yeah, it also means like, in the realm of, I think one of the things we'll probably end up talking about today is like, there's a difference between IT and cybersecurity, right?
Okay.
IT is this focus of operational components of computer networking, right? So
Okay.
I can't get to this application. This application's unavailable. Hey, I'm having this issue when
Like
I click this button to hit
troubleshooting,
this
just
area.
okay.
Yeah, it's just keeping the lights on type of stuff, right? That's
Yeah.
like when you're in IT, you know how to keep the lights on and things like that. And cybersecurity is when you're actually leveraging like adversarial tactics, whether it's like defensively or actively in your network in order to break systems, right, and to break into systems. So
Okay.
it's a much different focus. And so that being said, when you're in that higher level of clearance, right, you learn that higher level of security,
Yeah.
and you kind of understand those expectations from a different perspective, right? And so there's going to be more protocols, there's going to be more kind of defenses that are put in place. And so you kind of just get visibility and like hands-on
Okay.
onto a lot of different things that you wouldn't outside of a TS environment.
Interesting. Before we get there, what was it like the 4 years you were in Marines? Like what on a week to week, month to month basis, what did your life look like?
Yeah, so I guess there's there's kind of three main areas that I'll break down is like there's training, right? Up front,
Okay.
you're doing training, so that's your boot camp, that's your Marine combat training. If you're in infantry, you're going to go straight from boot camp to infantry training, and that's quite a bit longer because your school is essentially like combat training, right? So
Okay.
people that have what are called like non-combative MOSs, which is what mine was, in communications, we get combat training and then we go to our communication school,
Okay.
right? And or mechanic school or driving school or whatever your job is. So then from there, now what was interesting is that so I was in California for my training portions all throughout. So boot camp was in San Diego, and uh, the combat training was in San Diego as well.
Okay.
But it's not like, oh, I was in California. I was on base and I was looking at planes flying places, and I'm like, oh man, it'd be really great to be on one of those things. And then I would get right back to like my run or my workout or whatever that was. And then after you complete training, right, you go into what's called the fleet, and then you're actually a part of your unit, right? And then whatever your unit's mission is like what you're involved in, right? So that means sometimes your units are leading up to a deployment. Sometimes your units are, coming back from a deployment, or they're getting ready to go. Whether this deployment is to another country or to a humanitarian mission, like a responsive mission. There was a lot of missions with resources in Africa, resources in Puerto Rico. Anytime that there's like a natural disaster, we end up sending resources there as well. So sometimes you could be called to respond to some of those things. It really kind of depends on what is termed as like the needs of the Marine Corps at the time. Right. So in the fleet, you can have a variety of experiences. And that's what's also interesting is like, as you talk to more military people, everybody has a different experience, right? Not everybody has a great experience. I would like to say that mine was pretty decent, right? It wasn't
pretty decent is your response.
It's hard to say. It's a love-hate, you know what I mean? Because you love so many things about it. And Marines have a huge I will forever see myself as a Marine. You can't, and whenever I see Marines out, I love, getting a beer with them, talking with them, talking about all the war stories and things like that. And you just have this level of camaraderie that transcends anything else. Like whether we'll stop a business meeting if we find out, that somebody's Marine, just to kind of talk about that and share in that moment, just because the perspective, the lineage, the way that Marines approach their life is much different. So when you it's kind of a loaded question, right? Of to ask an individual to represent, their experience, because it's not the same experience for everybody. But we all trained, we all ate crappy food in the chow hall or in MREs, and lost plenty of sleep, slept in dirt, slept on vehicles, and it's something that you kind of you learn to love those parts of yourself, and then you kind of figure out what things need to change from that, because not everything that you do supports you in life after the fact, right? Okay. And that's one thing that is difficult, because your training, especially as a young man, right, as an 18-year-old or a young person, you are trained in a specific way to think this way, and this is what the mission is, right? Mm-hmm. But when you leave, right, you're no longer a part of that mission. Now you got your own mission, right? Yeah. So what things did you do that absolutely support that versus what things, maybe don't support that anymore?
So you have to, how did you transition back into civilian life, as far as like parlaying experiences and skills you learned in the Marines into a different life now?
I mean, it's tough. It's definitely tough. I got out in 2012. And it's 2020 now. And I would say in the past 2 years is when I felt like I was really succeeding in post-transition life.
Really?
So I would say it took me a good 6 years between where I was at emotionally, where I was at from my spiritual development, where I was at with my just personal development on what I'm ultimately trying to be in life, and how I'm trying to locate that. And then professional development is a whole nother ball game in and of itself as well, because not everybody understands how to translate military experience, and that was something that I had to learn very, very easily. Right? You can get a job anywhere, right? Mm-hmm. And so finding out the best place for me in the market was the hardest part of that, is taking the skills that I knew I had and then figuring out, okay, I go work for this company. Well, this is not, I like these things and I don't like these things. And this is what I'm looking for. Okay, take that to the next organization, right? I like these things. I don't like these things. And then slowly but surely, I just kind of like started zeroing in on this is exactly what I want to do. And that was a tough transition to make. I had a ton of help in terms of, friends and family and there was a lot of people that I met in my life that were transitional right at that time of like, they kind of met me in a place where I wasn't, I was still in my Marine Corps mindset, right? And then there's kind of like post Marine Corps me that, a lot of people are still kind of getting introduced to in some fashion, right? So that transition is really more about like, and this is actually a story that so many people are dealing with when they're getting out, because in many cases, a lot of people join the military because of a few different things, right? It's some component of their country and wanting to serve their country and providing that selfless opportunity. Some people are joining because they don't have any other choice, and other people are joining because their family did it, right? And so in the world of your family did it, right? You have a huge support system. You already have an understanding of connectedness to the military, unlike many people. And we're talking about immediate family. Like if your parent was in the military, that's what those type of people I'm talking about. And then people that wanted to serve, right? They depending on where they sit in the spectrum of warfare, kind of depends on their experience, and also every branch is different, right? Marine Corps is kind of a hardcore environment. That is a true military environment. Whereas like the Air Force is run a little bit more like some civilian organizations, right? They're not gonna like immediately start dogging you for something wrong. They're probably gonna take a normal counseling methodology. Whereas like the Marine Corps will just like beat it out of you, for lack of a better term. But you get out, right, and you had all these accolades and all this understanding that served this one community that you had. And that was the warfare concept of just understanding how different countries go to war, understanding how different methodologies in warfare, and even the rank structure, right? If you get to a certain rank, you have people saluting you if you're on the officer side, and then you have, if you become a staff NCO, which is a pretty high rank in the military, that's it. There's a kind of an old joke that says it takes an act of Congress to take their rank away. That's how much it's earned, right?
Wow.
And
yeah.
So to even get that rank to begin with, and then be able to excel in those ranks, you find somebody who's like 20 to 25, 30 years in, and all they know is the military, and then they get out and Joe Blow down the street or the finance advisor that is looking to hire you, they don't have any context to what that life is, right? They don't.
Yeah.
And ultimately, most people I find don't really care. That being said, the people that do try to relate, it's hit or miss. But not trying to bring a negative attitude, right? It's just a reality of being in the military. Is like it is a wholly different world than what civilians deal with, look at, and have to deal with. And I fully recognize, like, I may be a veteran, but I definitely am 100% a civilian, right? I'm not.
You mentioned the last 2 years. You said like within the last 2 years. So what have you been doing the last 2 years where you feel like you've been finding yourself, who you are, and you're in your right groove?
Yeah. So, well, I felt like I really started zeroing in and taking charge of my personal career and my personal development in a different way, because like I did kind of all the what you would call like blocking and tackling, right? Of like I stopped living with crappy roommates, and I stopped drinking too much, and started smoking weed more, and all those
you're
things
smoking weed more, you said?
Well, when I got out, right, that was something that really helped me transition,
Yeah.
And at the time that I was getting out, I was drinking quite a bit at the time. But smoking weed kind of helped me just, but I started using it more effectively as time went on, right? Initially, it was just like, oh, I treated it just like drinking, and I tried to replace it, right? And in reality, it just supported me more when I started using it more like a medicine. And so that was, so coupled with all of that blocking and tackling, when I started this company, and there was just a huge opportunity in front of me, right? Kind of creating my own space, and I had an opportunity to make a name for myself. And it's also when I first started wearing suits. So getting into that side of my life was kind of different. So between getting involved into more things than just work, and choosing a job that was very difficult, but was kind of creating a cornerstone for myself. I was learning things that weren't necessarily related to the ones and zeros and the technical stuff related to, IT and cybersecurity. I was learning how to communicate with business leaders, and how to create effective presentations, and how to really draw out and understand how to make things successful within a solution or transaction or things like that. So I started learning a great deal of business acumen that I was kind of on the outside looking in, doing from the engineering side. And so this was kind of the first time really coming into focus for me. And so that, coupled with learning the fashion world, that's just kind of opened up my life.
So what got you into fashion? If you look at like your Johnny's Instagram, you're wearing like these really nice suits and stuff. How did you get into fashion?
So I started at this job, and I had to wear suits every day. That was just the culture of the company, and I had never been in an organization that had required that. In the military, right, you have your uniforms, you take care of your uniforms, and I always kept my stuff tailored and fitted well. But I didn't go find the best fabrics. And it was funny, I actually took a fashion dynamics class in high school. And so I kind of knew about some of the how brands worked, how clothes were made, and like some of the business process behind some of that stuff. But I just never really gotten invested in brands. And even as a little kid, I didn't really like logos. I never was a fan of that kind of stuff. So I'd kind of done all these little subtle things, and I could put together outfits, and never had a problem with color. So when I just started in the medium of suits, right, you get a couple of cheap suits, and then I wanted to get them tailored better. And then I'm like, okay, well, I'm spending a lot on tailoring. Where can I just find better clothes to begin with? And then I'm learning, okay, what kind of fabric is this? How is it made? Where, and just kind of really zeroing in on the types of fabrics that I'm putting on my body, and then the type of fit that I'm looking for. And just started developing a lot of different relationships. And then my wardrobe started getting better. And then I get stopped on the street by people saying like, hey, I love your stuff, and would like to know where you got it, and this, that, and the other. And started kind of consulting on my own, and helping people in that way. And then I started designing suits through a friend of mine's brand as well. So it just kind of went the full scale very, very quickly, and even going as far as to get involved in Fashion Group International, which is not a local group. It's a worldwide organization, and just seeing different parts of the fashion community, from makers to people that are kind of doing the jewelry side of the house, and just kind of learning from any and all environments and people, right? So it kind of started off very organically for me, and then just through, I'm a really big component of I don't like to buy everything brand new. I love getting vintage pieces. So anytime I can go to a consignment shop or something like that, I mean, you can get amazing pieces that are what I would say in the 85% quality range, right? You might have a little nit here, or a little, imperfection. But I think that type of character is, ultimately just something to be revered, right? As opposed to I'm not going to wear that. So you can get, highly subdued prices in that case, and have these still high. I mean, silk is still silk 60 years later, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it's once I started embracing that and kind of learning more about the lineage of certain fashion houses and things like that, I started having a lot more fun and started finding, a lot more things that I would not have thought of beforehand.
Interesting. How much of fashion is confidence?
I think that's an interesting question because it's I would argue that it's everything in that sense because I actually look at, so there are things that, and this is something I would tell my clients as well, right? Just because something looks a certain way on me does not mean that I would have that be for you, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so when you're talking about the fit and how things fit, right? So we'll just take the fit for a second. There's oversized and then there's like very tailored stuff, right? Some people like the real thing in suits that you look on Instagram right now, like everybody's, wearing a super small t-shirt and they got big muscles and the suit is tailored just as tight as, a normal sweatshirt would be, right? Whereas when you kind of look at, maybe an older guy is going to have, a bit of a looser fit and kind of like, space in the sleeves and whatnot. And the suit still fits them, right?
Mm-hmm.
But it's just, it's tailored differently versus like you have some fashion forward looks where, and you generally see this more on the runway or people like, Kim Kardashian or Kylie Jenner, people like that, where they have severely oversized garments that are like inches bigger than they're supposed to be. And it's just cut differently so that it looks different, right? And I think either way you cut it, it takes confidence to look at those things and say, that's what I want on my body. And that's how I'm going to, represent myself to the world. And so I think when you try to take that on to an everyday status of like, okay, what type of style am I really comfortable in every day? Like, hey, I've got an everyday sweater on right now. Like if I'm going to step out the door, I'm going to grab a coat, I'm going to grab a scarf. I'm not going to change an outfit. Right.
Mm-hmm.
And I think if you are getting dressed up to go somewhere is a lot different than when you're just getting dressed for yourself. So if you can figure out what makes you confident when you're getting dressed for yourself, and then you're able to put yourself in spaces, that whether you want to be there or not, and you're still comfortable being yourself, then you've reached that like peak style confidence.
Right? Yeah, that goes a long way.
Yeah, it does.
So are you guys still working on it? But like COVID, I know people aren't really going out or.
Right. Yeah, I have definitely stopped designing suits at the beginning of the year. I got a job that I'm very excited to be doing what I'm doing now. And I wanted to put more focus into that. So I decided to kind of put that to the side. I still have a love and passion for it. I literally just went vintage shopping yesterday and hit up my tailor yesterday for a couple of pieces that I found. So it's still very much a part of my life. And even though, we're inside, I'm still investing in my wardrobe. But no, I've kind of stopped designing things just because it's difficult to call on people right now and say, hey, do you want to buy a suit? And it's like, well, I'm in my PJs and have been all week. It's like, me too, man. Like, I get it, right? And I mean, who knows how long we're going to be here? Who knows where things are going to be in a year from now? But I think just where I'm at in my life, like, and this opportunity that kind of landed on my lap, like I wanted to put all my eggs into that basket for a little bit. And I mean, I'll still be adding to my wardrobe, you know what I mean? So there'll be things that will come out in the next few years, and I'll eventually put myself back into the fashion world in my own way. But for right now, I'm not actively doing anything that's like a brand related or anything like that.
Got you. So now you're working in cybersecurity, right? And you touched a little bit about it earlier, but what's the role of cybersecurity in our world today?
Man, I think that's and if you look at just the news in the past 2 weeks, I mean, there's been some really large hacks between SolarWinds and what's going on with FireEye. And so it's really interesting the I was actually watching Al Jazeera earlier today, and there was some political commentary between some, excuse me, like information security advisors and national security advisors, and then some political advisors related to Russia. And Russia's, commenting, no, hey, no, we haven't done this, and what have you, right? And there's an interesting conversation that was brought up that said, how much of a cyber attack is cyber warfare, right? And I
Okay.
think that's the thing, is that we really don't have definitions. We're in what we would call the fourth revolution, right? And that is the digital revolution, the information age, as it were.
Right.
And we're still finding and understanding these kind of like unprecedented attacks, where tactics, they're very highly targeted. They have nation state backing in many cases. It's funny, we talk about in cybersecurity. In the past decade, you've probably heard things like, a 16-year-old with a laptop and enough time can break into a lot of places, and that's very well true. But from a like national or country perspective, the only difference between like premier level hackers is the amount of resources that they have at their fingertips, right? The difference between somebody sitting working alone or working with a small team is that they have limited resources in terms of time. They have limited resources in terms of potential compute, right? Of just being able to invest in the resources that they're working on from a hardware or software perspective. And then they just have limited capabilities from a knowledge base standpoint, right? You may have a few programmers, you may have somebody who's really good at data enumeration or advanced techniques, but when it really comes down to it, when you have more resources, your time window can be greatly subdued. So I think when you ask the question like, what does that mean for our world today? I think we're all still figuring that out. And I also think that there are some really easy ways for people to get involved and learn more. I mean, I don't have a college degree myself, right? And there are so many people like me that are in technology that started just putting themselves in those spaces and started learning, what different things mean and how to secure themselves. And then, started to kind of get jobs and get offers based on their knowledge alone.
Their knowledge and skills. Yeah.
Right. But there is a 0% unemployment in cybersecurity right now. And that's because the skills are very tough to get and they're tough to find. And there's just, everybody, so a lot of people are changing over to cybersecurity. But it's kind of interesting what it means for our time from an economic level, from a just, where people put their time and efforts. And it's a problem that everybody really needs to consider, right? Because
absolutely,
you've got finance, you've got healthcare that you've got to consider as an everyday human, and cybersecurity is definitely on the top list. I was just going through my password manager and like, what, I've reused some of these passwords. I need to go back and correct that, because if I'm not taking a proactive stance on my security, then when it is compromised later, I don't really have a good excuse as to why things were done.
What are some things that like everyday people should be aware of?
Okay, so I mean, some of the simple stuff, right? I think if you were to pull up a YouTube video, right, and like top 10 cybersecurity tips, you're going to hear things like, don't connect without a VPN, or just get a VPN if you don't have one. I think
so. Okay, so I'm gonna stop you right there. What's a VPN?
Oh yeah. Okay, so yeah, let me break that down. So it's a virtual private network.
Okay.
Right. So let's I have a laptop. I'm inside of Starbucks, and I want to connect to the internet, right?
Okay.
Well, by virtue of making that connection, right, anybody else depending on the settings of my machine, anybody else can see what type of traffic I'm sending, what my device is, like what is operating system my device has, what browser I'm using. Like you can tell very easily just by the traffic your computer is sending and being connected to that network. And depending on what security software you have in place, that can make you susceptible to attacks, right? If they're able to gain that data, they could take advantage of it in some way.
Okay.
So when you have a virtual private network, you're actually encrypting the traffic from your machine so that it can't be broken apart, right? And then it's a
Okay.
much more complicated attack that is required in order to break apart those encrypted packets.
Okay.
So a VPN is like, a top level way to protect yourself. The things that you're going to run into there is like performance, right? If you are, because basically what you're doing is that VPN is now a proxy for your stuff, right? So depending on the
Cool.
type of VPN, you may have your traffic going, over to Georgia to that server, right? And then being bounced back to your computer. So that's going to create some latency. So
Oh,
performance may be a consideration if you
okay.
have like a game that you're trying to play or a app that requires a fast connection. You may run into issues with those things, and you would need to test those, right?
Yeah.
But that's also kind of like an advanced. At that point, if you're trying to run apps or games over it, you're probably trying to do something outside of the everyday person, right?
Okay.
Aside from that, I think other things that you can do to protect yourself is hey, stop writing down passwords. Get a strong password manager and manage things that way, because and set up two-factor authentication with anything and everything that you can.
Really? Okay.
Because having simple passwords, like it's one of the simplest ways to crack. If somebody does get something, and
What's a good password and a bad password as far as the complexity and
yeah, so that's going to be dependent on how many characters and then how many types of characters that you
okay.
have, right? So if you just have, lowercase letters and numbers, even if that's a 12-digit password, that's still going to be easier to crack
Okay.
than like a 9-digit password that has 4 different types of characters in it, right?
So
So
what's a
the
password manager?
a password manager is something like LastPass, or I think Duo has one as well. I know Dropbox actually has one as well. And basically what that is like you can install it to your browser and you can log into that, and then it'll have all of your passwords for all your main sites listed out for you. So then you can save, okay, my bank is bankofamerica.com. And then when you go to bankofamerica.com and you click log in, right, it can pre-populate or manage the password input right there, right? So you
Okay.
can either log in to copy paste and put it in there, or you can have it connected to your browser so that it autofills. Excuse me. And then that way you're not having to memorize anything. You don't have to keep it in a notepad, which is like the worst offenders, or keep an Excel spreadsheet of all these things. Because
Why
the
is that?
day,
Because that can be hacked and you can
yes, absolutely. That's the biggest problem, right? Is if you have these things sitting plain text, let's just say like you have a Excel spreadsheet, it's saved to your desktop, your computer gets stolen, and you
hmm
don't have encryption on your device, then I can rip that hard drive out. I don't even need to boot the computer up. I can rip that hard drive out, read it through my computer, and then look on your desktop and see that item, open it up, and then view everything. And that's not even hacking techniques. That's just what's available from the
mm,
machine, right? So
mm,
uh, being able to put that into a service or program that kind of manages that, it forces the attacker to, look in that direction if they're trying to get a hold of something, right? Because the only other, if they're trying to hack you in like legitimately a targeted attack, they either got to go to the website and crack them so that they can get your password, or they've got to
okay.
try and crack you, right?
Okay.
And if you don't have your passwords or anything saved anywhere and it's through this service, well, then they're trying to log into that service. If you have two-factor authentication in place, that means that when they try to initiate a login and try and get logged into your list of passwords, then you are going to be prompted with that immediately, and you can say, hey, that's not me, right? And so it's just kind
Okay.
of in security, it's about defense and depth, right? Some things are deterrence, some things are but ultimately you have to just put more steps in place. And the adverse part of that people really fight is like, oh man, another password I got to remember, right? And it's
Yeah.
like, well, if you can commit to learning one password and just have your password manager do the rest, then you can generate secure passwords. You don't have to memorize anything, and then it just does all that stuff for you. I can't say enough about that because we see so many banks that get hacked, and you don't know what level of information. And if you're somebody that uses passwords over and over and over again, if somebody actually has a legitimate list with your email and the password that you always use, you just gave them access to everything, right?
Yeah.
That you log into. So it's more of that, like, hey, in the grand scale, in the grand scheme of the world, like 99% of people are probably not being attacked as an individual,
Hmm.
right?
Right.
But when you're trying to protect yourself, you need to think from that adversary's side of the house and think, okay,
Mhm.
if I could do this, what would I go after first, right? And
Yeah.
and where am I going to find this information, and how can I prevent them from getting to that?
How much, I don't know if you would know this, but like how much of the military is transitioning into like cybersecurity?
Oh, well, I mean, the military has been. I am not the best resource to
Sure.
represent that, to be 100% true with you. But the Marine Corps has been sorry, the military, all aspects have been in cyber for quite some time.
Hmm.
But they're still advancing in their cyber command, right? So
Right.
much in the same way that we see like Space Force being created, right?
Mhm.
They're still kind of creating the U.S. Cyber Command in a lot of ways, and kind of bringing those resources together, because you kind of have the bureaucracy of who does what and what command has control over what things and who checks who, and where
Mhm.
does the money come from and all that kind of stuff. And then you actually have like the know-how and the people, and all those things. And we've had the know-how and the people for quite some time, but it's a vast world to cover in the cybersecurity landscape. And so it's not something that we haven't been doing. It's just something that is a constant fight, and that kind of comes to, I think you're going to see more um, changes as time goes on, and converging some of those like network and security elements, right? Because
Okay.
in many cases, you have cybersecurity people that don't really know how to set up servers and set up networks and things like that. They know
Mm.
what things to look for and what things they can take advantage of. Just in the same way that like an IT person knows how to set up a network but doesn't exactly know how to break it. So I think you're going to see a convergence of those skill sets
Okay.
in the future, and things are going to alter as more platforms and more things change, right? Something that's interesting is like if we look at the wheel, right? So think about luggage, right? Luggage has been around for millennia,
Right.
right? And wheels have been around almost just as long. Not until 1976 did somebody put wheels onto
Luggage.
a suitcase,
Yeah.
right? And now you can't really think of getting luggage without wheels on it,
Yeah.
right? So I think we're kind of starting to see some of those things really come to a head.
Okay.
And I think it's just one of those things, like, I try not to worry about where everybody else is with
Mhm.
things, right? You've got to look at what you have. And I say this from the perspective of like America, right? Like if we're legitimately trying to be a force in cybersecurity, then we have to look at, all the areas of
Yeah.
where our infrastructure sits, where our people sit, and, what are the high priority areas in terms of risk that we need to isolate first, and then start doing those internal audits and setting yourself up for success.
Yeah. Something I was thinking about yesterday, or I have been thinking during this election cycle, we did the mail-in voting,
Mhm.
and everyone that I talked to was like, "Oh my gosh, that was so much easier. I love that. I love that." Electronic voting, is that something that can happen, or is it a risk, or what does that look like?
I mean, yeah, anything's a risk, right? There's kind of
Right.
a joke. I'm sorry, what's that?
Sorry, you got cut off. Go ahead.
Oh, yeah, no, yours was cutting off too. So, your question was, what does electronic look like in the world of cybersecurity, electronic voting,
Yeah,
right?
is that something that's possible, or is it too risky right now, or
I think that's an interesting question, right? So, I mean, you have all kinds of platforms that are out there saying, like, listen, we can protect your identities, and hey, we can
Mm-hmm.
secure your data, and we can do this and we can do that, right? And what it ultimately comes down to is any CISO that is in charge of an organization, whether it's Walmart with the 250,000 employees that they have, and accessing all the thousands of systems that they have, right? But when you look at what their decision making is, um, it's kind of the same way. It's like, hey, what do we have to do to manage these elements of access, right?
Okay.
So how are you validating these people are who they say you are? How are you validating the integrity of the data? How are you validating the availability of the systems that you're putting in place, right? And then how do you check the people that are also putting in those systems?
Yeah.
I think I'm definitely a supporter of technology, and I love to believe that if it can be created securely, then let's establish it.
Mm-hmm.
How far we are from it, that's really hard to say because I mean we went to the moon in 1969, right? Because
Mm-hmm.
we decided to, and I think when we decide to make that a component of uh, our voting system, then I think that it will be seriously taken considered. But in the world that we live in right now, it's really tough because we're also in the world of like the largest misinformation that people have ever witnessed in their lives, right?
Mm-hmm.
Half the links that you click on Facebook and things like that, even with their protections in place, are like, pick me links or click me links that don't really mean a whole lot.
Mm-hmm.
So it kind of begs the question: if you can't combat the misinformation, and then how are you going to instill trust and security in the systems that you're actually putting in place when they're like legitimate systems? And especially when you look at the nuclear program being hacked. Now, although the current reports that I've read have said that this is a business side, and I know from being in the military that many mission or operationally focused systems are air gapped from like kind of the administrative side of the house, right? So just because you're like in the nuclear program doesn't mean you have access to the keys.
So what is that an example of? Is that a recent one?
Yeah, that's one of the big hacks right now that was part of the SolarWinds hack.
Okay.
And they got into one of the systems that govern our nuclear program.
Okay.
But it was on the administrative / business side of managing that program, as opposed to the mission side of like, hey, you know, this computer system or terminal manages this missile directly, right? Or
Yeah.
this nuclear program directly, right? So the difference there is or what I was trying to represent there, right, is that even in the scale of the attacks today, it's still you still have to do a deep investigation into exactly what happened, and
Mm-hmm.
then you still have to bring that information to the people and then explain to them what happened. But you still have interpretations, right?
Oh,
So
yeah.
the biggest problem is going to be adoption of the systems as well as the security, right? Because if you haven't fixed the security problem, then your adoption isn't going to be great because people don't trust it. And then if your adoption is great, but then you don't fix the security problems, well, now you've just hurt all the people that were ready to embrace this new system, and now they can't trust the system because it's been compromised.
So you
Right.
have to, it comes down to commitment. And once you have a large pool of people or organizations that commit to something, that's when you're able to actually go all in and look at it just wholesomely and just figure it out. Yeah.
Absolutely.
And yeah, right now we're not ready for that. That's interesting. Um, what about, I'm just so curious about like big tech, like say Google, Apple, Facebook, Amazon, the technology and the data that they have. I'm curious about like in the 21st century, what is the role of those companies and as individuals giving our information to them, the responsibility and who oversees that. And there's not really a question there, but I'm just like curious about like
Yeah, no,
big
of
tech
course.
and ethics and I don't know, you know?
Right. So, well, I mean, ethics is one thing, right? I can't really comment on the ethics side of the house
Right.
because that really comes down to governance, right?
Hmm.
When you start getting into the segregation of duties and hey, these people can manage this component of like you can have a data controller and then there's the people that can actually manipulate the data, right?
Hmm.
And so you kind of have those checks and balances in place, and that exists in a variety of spaces. But taking specifically like anytime anybody's evaluating putting their information into a SaaS-based application like Dropbox or
Okay.
OneDrive or something like that, or if you're looking at infrastructure as a service, right, for your Google Cloud platform or your AWS platform or your Azure platform, um, you are ultimately taking on the responsibility,
The
right? And
individual.
the individual, right?
Yeah.
So there's
Okay.
kind of they in the terms and conditions of the service agreement between you and that provider, there is a level of responsibility that's like displayed there, right? And they're basically
Do
saying
you
like,
read
hey,
the terms and services?
only when it comes down to like specific questions around levels of service or availability or things like that. I'm not going to sit there and read every single one of them.
Right.
And there is a lot of tools out there and kind of like know-how that are put in place to help represent these platforms in a real way. And that's done through components like CASB and things like cloud access security brokers that can kind of
Okay.
break down the risks associated with certain platforms and whatnot. But that being said, it comes down to like, hey, listen, if I delete my own data or if some malicious attacker deletes my data, they're not responsible for it, right?
Okay.
And in some cases, you have shared responsibility where they are just as responsible as you are responsible for the information that's in there.
Okay.
And that's different as well. So, when you talk about what big organizations have to do ethically, I think they're already, in the world of like we are doing the best we can to create a secure environment, to test that secure environment, and to
Hmm.
update and fix problems with the environment that we uncover. Right. I think all those systems are really in place, and then it really comes down to are they actually being effective? Because I think a bigger problem is not even necessarily the security that's oriented around those organizations, but their ability to economically do what they like, right? And that is an interesting conversation when you start talking about Facebook and how these social media organizations are really data warehouses that sell seconds of your eyeballs to organizations, in order
And
to.
they get that information for free. We give it to them, right?
Yep. Yeah, and we give them that information, absolutely. And what's interesting is like people like Google have always been like, listen, you sign up for our service, we'll give you Gmail, you can have email, and
Hmm.
hey, we're gonna take a little data off the top, we're gonna use it, and we'll see you guys later. You enjoy the service, right?
Hmm.
But the difference is in social media is that they're taking so much more of who you are
Yeah.
as opposed to just like usage statistics, and creating profiles around like I can go and put an ad together around like what this person does for a living.
Hmm.
Are they a family person? What's their age, right? What
Yeah.
are they interested in? What are their other likes, right? And what other accounts are they following and things like that. So you can really pinpoint people that are susceptible, and then you also have like usage rates coupled with that of like, hey, this person, after looking at this for 5 seconds, this person clicked on this ad and bought something.
Yeah.
And people that scroll past ads and buy something, anytime this person is doing this at a certain time, they can actually create an algorithm that presents that
Yeah.
ad at the most opportune time that that person is
Right.
likely to buy something.
And these are things we need to be thinking about as individuals, as like Americans, and just like the world. Like we're, we got to figure this out, right? So what does this
Well,
mean?
it's funny that if you talk to any, I really don't like these terms, but like Gen Z person, right? That's like in the 18 to, or I would even say like 14 to 21-year-old bracket right now. They know that they are being advertised to like literally at every turn. Like they are fully aware in many cases that if they're on these platforms, and for them, like it's just like this is how the system was built, right? And but it is really incumbent on us to understand how these systems were built and decide whether or not they serve us, and ultimately if some organization is able to make billions and billions of dollars off of you as an individual, that's where things like GDPR, General Data Protection Regulations, that was debuted in the EU a few years ago, that entire compliance is designed around protecting personally identifiable information. And it's down to the religion you have, to your age, like anything that is associated with your name needs to be managed a certain way. And I need to be able to request to not only see it, but also to have it fully removed from your systems in conjunction with that. So that people that are certified as GDPR and meeting those data regulation standards, that I know that they're handling my data in that particular way.
Interesting.
Right. And so that was a really good example of, a government and a people kind of coming together and saying, like, listen, these are the standards by which we want our data managed so that our people can decide how they want to do their data, and then know that on the other side of it, that compliance is guaranteed.
Those are some big ideas to chew on, some big thoughts. Going in a little different direction. I'm curious about gaming. I'm not really in this community. You have all these tech skills. I feel like gamers tend to like know how to do stuff, like with wires and electronics and networks and everything like that. What is the world of gaming like?
Well, that's interesting, right? Because it's funny. I would say PC gamers have a good understanding of, and if they've built it themselves, right, they have a good understanding of like, okay, this is how the computer works, right? And this is how the operating system handles things. This is how my data is handled. This is how the drivers work to connect my hardware components to the software. But there's also, console gamers, right, which have been around for many years, since the 80s. And that's a whole different
so there's like
side of the house. And,
okay.
Right. So I think for me, gaming is much larger than just like PC gamers. Even though I predominantly am a PC gamer, I still look at people that like, hey, there's actually a documentary called Fistful of Quarters that I think I want to recommend you check out. And it's about people that play arcade games competitively, right? And
that's becoming a very big thing now, like esports and streaming Twitch.
Now esports are those are around newer games for sure. But they have had like world championships for like Donkey Kong and Miss Pac-Man and like that in the past. But the difference is that you had a machine, and you kind of had to go, the machine has to be validated working and whatnot. So the difference there for esports is now they're playing a game that everybody's playing at home, right? And what's interesting is that when COVID hit, they wanted a lot of people were like, why can't we just play the games from home? Because in true game conference, sports fashion, people were saying like, no, you come here, you play in front of each other, it's on validated systems in front of people, and you see the live action, and so there's kind of this interesting conversation right now of like, can we do esports remotely? And I think that kind of remains to be seen. But the gaming community is like really interesting because you have all these different types of games that are out there, and we're talking about genres, right? So you have your FPS games, you've got your RPG games, and racing games, and just puzzle games, or horror games is a really big thing as well right now. And so I think when you look at the type of system that you're playing and the types of games that you're playing, you could be playing, altogether different people, just based on the types of games and, what console you're on. Or some people, swear by they only play on Xbox, or they only play on PlayStation, right? And then you're just in whatever that ecosystem is to begin with.
So would you say that there's like a different culture around if you're PC gaming versus PlayStation versus this genre of game versus that genre of game? Like there's all these different niches of the gaming community?
Yeah, for instance, right? Well, let's just take PC gamers to begin with, right? So there's people that will buy a system because they want to play a game and they're just using the PC system, right?
Okay.
And so they're not altogether different from a console gamer in that they bought a device and then they game on it. But then there are gamers that, like myself, that started off building machines and then wanting to run certain games, right, at a certain performance level. And then those are what I would call the enthusiast gamers, right? And they're trying to achieve a certain level of performance. And so they upgrade their machine in deliberate ways in order to ensure that performance, whether that's putting in solid state drives, whether that's getting a more powerful monitor to actually display frames at a higher rate or at a higher resolution, right? So that, and you don't have those options in a console, right? You plug it into the TV, and then if your TV's 1080p or 4K or whatever, then you're kind of relying on whether or not the machine can actually translate, those different resolutions and whatnot. But I think that's kind of the difference, is that when you meet a PC gamer, depending on whether or not they like building their own machines, is going to be the big difference on the type of gamer they are. Because there are people that spend, thousands. I've spent a couple of grand on my machine, but I'm very I upgrade it every 3 to 5 years and then I don't touch it, right? Some people are like, I need this launch, I need this at launch, or they're like, okay, I want to have a whole water cooling setup, which is a whole thing in and of itself, right? Or they want to
water cooling. What is that?
Yeah. Oh, okay. So yeah, there's water. So PC parts or just hardware in general has some heat output, right? Your phone gets hot when you're using it, so you can't get away from the thermodynamics of electricity moving through hardware components. And as hardware components get designed better, you have better cooling components, but you still need to have extra cooling, and that means fans, that means bigger heat sinks in many cases. So like a graphics card manufacturer like NVIDIA will put out a reference card, and then that reference card will be taken from another manufacturer like an enthusiast manufacturer, and they'll basically take that card. They may make some modifications to the software on it, but they'll almost always add hardware to it, which comes in the case of a bigger heatsink and more fans, so that the cooling is better, so that they can push the card harder in order to make it perform better. So when you use water cooling, you get a better, design from actually being able to take heat from things, because water takes heat away much easier than air does. So you can connect your CPU and your GPU to water blocks, which essentially put the processor right underneath the water block, and that acts like a radiator. And then they have constantly cycling water going over it that's cooling it and pulling the heat away, and then going to elsewhere in the case.
So gaming can be whatever level you want it to be. It can be pretty elaborate to just I enjoy playing this game. I'm gonna play it for 5 minutes. Yeah. Wow.
Right. Oh yeah. I'm definitely not a hardcore gamer myself. Like, love video games. I play a lot of different types of video games. I like FPS. I like racing. I like RPG stuff. But I'll probably hop on. There'll be some weeks where, I know I did like 30 hours of a game in a 2-week period when I found Need for Speed Heat, right? But this past week I've probably played maybe 4 hours, right? So I'm a very infrequent game. When I find time to do it or have the availability to do it, I will. But that's kind of what I love about that community, is that you have so many different people that do so many different things, and they can usually show you a game you've never seen, or show you some technique that you haven't thought of before, or something like that. So the gaming community is very rich. There are some people that are like, if you go into a chat room, right, or if you go into like a game and try and play against competitive people, then it can get a little bit toxic, right? Because you have people that are like trying to win, And
Yeah.
they're so intent on winning that when they win, they want to let you know, hey, by the way, I won.
Of
So
course.
that can be a little obnoxious here and there, but generally speaking, I would say like most gamers are awesome people.
Yeah. What are 3 books that you've read that have influenced you?
Okay, so actually, real quick, I'm gonna run and grab this book because I did want to show it to you. One
Yeah.
second. All right, so this is my #1 book, right? And this is called The Four
4
Agreements.
Agreements. Interesting.
Have you read this?
I have come across that. I forget. I don't know where I came across it. The cover is very distinctive. I remember it. I don't know I wonder if I got one at an estate sale or I'm aware of that book, but why don't you describe it for listeners?
Yeah, so it reveals the source of self-limiting beliefs. And then it gives you 4 agreements that you can make with yourself that if you adhere to these agreements, that you will find and enable yourself to remove suffering from your life,
Okay.
right? Because at the source of our experience is our interpretation of whether or not this is serving me or whether or not this is making me suffer. Right. And so by analyzing these agreements, and I'll read them right here, just and then we can chat about them. But the first one is be impeccable with your word.
With your word? You say word or work?
Word.
Okay, got you.
Yep. WROD.
Say what you mean. Do what you say.
Say what you mean, and only what you mean. If you speak against yourself, or if you gossip about other people, right? That's kind of like a computer virus. At the end of the day, right? It's you're introducing bad energy, and therefore you're not really putting yourself in a good position because you're either putting that negative energy within yourself and then you are reflecting on it and you are keeping that energy in that place, or you're giving it to other people and then you're either being perceived as that way or worse yet, like you're instilling that negative energy within others, right? And then there's don't take anything personally.
That's a hard one for a lot of people.
That is the
for everybody, really.
That is the toughest one because there's so much in our brains, right? That when we're, sitting here looking back at you, like I didn't start my day off today that well, right? My energy wasn't there. I was still excited to come here and to talk to you and to have this experience. But even leading up to it, I was like, oh man, is he gonna see that I'm off? Is that gonna like ruin this, that, and the other? And it's like, well, no, like Rich is here and I'm here and we're just here in this experience.
Yeah.
And even if things get misinterpreted or what have you, like it is a very difficult thing for us to not take those personally because especially somebody who is very self-development oriented, they want to look back and say, okay, what can I do better for the next time? Right. But then there's just times where it's like, this is not for me. This is not the energy that I need to take on because that's coming from somebody else. Right. Yeah. And whether that's somebody expressing their, how much better at gaming they are than you in the chat room, right? Or something like that. Like, just don't take that energy with you throughout the day. And I think that's probably been one of the most important ones for me, and especially just hearing your reaction to it as well is just kind of like, man, that's a tall order, right?
Yeah.
To do that. And so it's just interesting how this is a short book too. I encourage everybody. I mean, it's less than 150 pages.
Okay.
So it's really good. And it kind of gives you some simple tools and thought processes to put yourself through to kind of like test the theory and understand why the agreement is very meaningful. And the third one is don't make assumptions.
Ooh,
nice. And I think that is the toughest. The second toughest one for the reasoning that you're constantly gaming out, right? Like, okay, I just met this person. I'm really excited about them. I'm going to take them on this date. And then you have this date experience and they're like, oh, well, are they interested in me? And are they, you know what I mean? It's like, you kind of game with yourself a little bit.
Yeah.
Because you want things to be successful.
Mm-hmm.
But when you make those assumptions or when you create these validations in your mind, then you're assuming, right? And so some people look at those as like, oh no, I've already thought about it. And it's like, okay, great, but have you checked with that individual? And it's like,
Right.
well, no. Right? So, and so many times, whether it's a personal tiff that somebody has with somebody, or whether it's somebody trying to establish a new relationship, or trying to interpret why my manager treated me this way with this workload, or what have you. Anytime we're revealing those things to ourselves, we should ask, like, okay, what do they think about this? If I brought this up to them, what would they say?
Yeah.
And then go find that out, right? Because the reality is almost certainly not as bad as you think it is in many cases.
Yeah, it's true. What's the last one?
So the last one is always do your best.
Okay.
And I think this one is important for removing suffering from a proactive perspective, because and an example that I used earlier of like, hey, I didn't have the best morning this morning. And so I was kind of nervous about coming into this, but I always know that whenever I'm in a new situation, I'm still trying to do my best. I'm the best Johnny that I can be right this moment. Right. And so if you did your best, then you have nothing to be sorry for. But when you withhold, right, something from somebody, or like if you see somebody crossing the street, you know what I mean, and they're about to get hit by that bus, and you don't reach out and grab them by the neck and pull them back, then you didn't do your best in that particular moment. And you might look at that situation as like, wow, that was an opportunity that I could do better, right? And so when you start taking more of those opportunities to do your best, and to just also forgive yourself for the times where you're not at your best state. And I think that's the toughest thing for people to do sometimes, because even though we always want to do our best, we're not, I mean, the times that we are in our peak is like 1%, right?
We're not computers. We're humans.
Right, we're on computers. I'm halfway through a meal, or the last thing I ate was too spicy and now it's making my stomach feel weird. Like, it's there's always something going on that's, taking our attention away, or that's, kind of bubbling up for us, or maybe something at work, maybe something, oh crap, I got to pay this bill. And, that means I'm not going to be able to, get Christmas gifts in the manner in which I wanted to, and what have you. And, just teach yourself to be a little bit more forgiving, and, understand that it's okay to just do the best that you can at that particular time, make amends with it, and then just keep showing up and doing your best. So this book, The Four Agreements, is the #1 book that I would say, like, read it, think about how you think about your life. And, I would argue that approach is an interesting one. And, it comes down to, with anything, right? It's either effective or not effective, right? Some people are very effective with taking on astrology, and some people don't really think that's effective for them. So the other 2 books that I would say that were really meaningful to me was #1 was Atomic Habits.
Okay, I've heard of that one.
Yeah, that was a James, and I want to say his last name's Blunt, but I'm probably wrong about that. But that was really interesting because James got into James Clear, apologies, it's James Clear. But it talks about transforming your life with tiny changes in behavior, right? And so he kind of went out, and this is interesting. I know I listened to this in audiobook form, but he talks about getting 1% better every day. And so there's this interesting quote that from him is that, anybody that shows up and is a very talented person but doesn't put that effort in is going to be outperformed just mathematically. They've done statistics and tests and all kinds of things to represent this, and that rather than somebody who deliberately makes that a part of their everyday functionality, right? And in terms of like, listen, I may not be the best boxer in the world, but I'm gonna hit this bag every day, right? And I'm going to run every day, and I'm going to, practice my stance and my steps, and put myself in the ring so that I can get beat up a little bit and toughen myself up. And that person is going to be more likely to want to fight than somebody who can, land that good haymaker, once every five,
Yeah.
times. And so I thought that was really interesting. And I mean, how can you get better, right? Is just making those 1% changes of like, okay, I didn't do this today, but tomorrow I'm doing those dishes.
Do you have any habits you do on a daily basis that you feel make your day better or get you in that right mindset every day?
Oh man, I got to look at fashion. That's like the number one thing. If you feel good, and that comes down to even taking care of yourself, doing the proper self-care is like the number one thing that you can do to make yourself more productive, right? If you're constantly rubbing your face because it's dry, like put moisturizer on in the morning or before you go to sleep, right?
Okay.
If you're constantly messing with your hair, like wear a hat or do your hair, you know what I mean? Whatever's going to make you productive. In the military, we always dressed for whatever the activity was, right? So I had a certain dress for formal, I had a certain dress for PT, I had a certain dress for, just my everyday activities and things like that. So in the realm of preparedness, self-care, keeping yourself clean, keeping yourself, looking and feeling good is the number one thing that I feel like makes people better. The other thing I would say is journaling. Journaling things is pretty huge because when you write things down, the experience and actually taking the time to write it down, your body interprets that differently neurologically than just typing, right? And if I just type like meet with Rich to have amazing conversation for a podcast, right? That's not going to be as seared into my memory as actually writing those words out. And so the interesting part about that is that you kind of learn to remove the clutter of your brain by giving yourself the time to write out the things that you needed to. Then you also kind of go through that exercise of, okay, what's the most succinct way that I can put this to myself so that it's meaningful when I come back to it? Okay. And then another part of the uncluttering is sometimes you just have to, in order to get a new idea in your mind, you have to release all of the things that you believe subconsciously. And that means that you have to just write them out. You have to just keep going. And then you look down at it and you're like, okay, I don't believe that. Why did I write that? Right. And then you can kind of start to get under the covers a little bit of your subconscious self to say, okay, that's why you believe this. This stems from this. And then you can work on those components separately. And then aside from that, just having a single place to know, like, all right, this is something I need to do, and writing it down. I've just been able to manage tasks a lot better and also set expectations for a little bit better. Because I know, like, okay, I got 5 things on my list and you're asking me to do that, which is going to reprioritize my list. So that means I need to set better expectations with you for my time right now. So
that's a big one.
There's a lot of different areas that I feel like journaling kind of can come into your life and be advantageous for anybody of any walk of life. But yeah, and then it just gets better to write things down and to communicate with people and things like that.
Then do you have a third book that's been influential on you?
So I was trying to think of stuff that I like read over the years. And the problem is I've done a lot more reading this year than I have done in the past, of course. But actually, I just finished Never Split the Difference by Chris Voss.
I haven't heard this one. What's it about?
Chris Voss was an FBI hostage negotiator for international situations. Okay. And what was special is that he really kind of pioneered an empathetic and methodical approach to negotiation rather than like, oh, this is how we do it, right? They kind of used real life situations, reviewed them after the fact, and tried to figure out why things didn't work, and then take a new approach to things, right? Okay. And so in the spirit of negotiation, he kind of sets the stage that negotiation belongs in everybody's life. you are negotiating with every person, with your kid to whether or not they get a cheese stick before dinner. You're negotiating with your parents, right? To get an allowance or to be able to get this job that you want to have, or what have you, or even just, negotiating for a job or for rent or what have you. So negotiation is at every single transaction, no matter how tied it is to financial perspective or to anything that you are expecting an outcome for, you have to negotiate for. So he kind of gives you. Now, I wasn't really good at like recalling exactly, okay, use this step for this situation, right? You have to read the book for that level of analysis. But my big takeaway from it is that, when you are evaluating people's responses, if you evaluate where those responses are coming from and why, it's generally speaking, it's a what's in it for me world, right? So you can't ask for everything and then expect them not to come with a price tag of some sort, right? And conversely, that there are some things that you can't give, right? And so how do you close the gap between this person wants this from me, right? And I need this from them, but I can only come this far and they're not trying to move at all, right? How do you get them to move closer? How do you, and it's kind of, I look at it as like, I always try to put things in visual perspective, and coincidentally that ultimately ends up into, me versus that other person in like a ring or something. And you know what I mean? Like every statement or everything that you're putting forth is a dodge or a block or a hit in some cases. So how you decide to deploy your communication capabilities determines what that outcome is ultimately going to be. So it's kind of helped me take negotiation a little bit more seriously. And, I started off being an engineer in IT and things like that. So as I started to get closer to doing sales and doing like engineering sales, which is, more in the statement of like solution providing and talking from a business outcome perspective, as opposed to talking through the actual technical components of architecture, it's really helped me kind of understand and establish some of those sales methodologies inside of the process of working through, discovery and validation of a solution and things like that, so that it's a little bit more congruent as opposed to just like, oh, there's a salesperson and then there's me as the engineer, to validate the technicality of the solution. So, that was a really, I definitely recommend everybody look at that, because
what's it called again?
It's called Never Split the Difference by Chris
Never
Voss.
Split the Difference. Cool.
It's really, really good. And especially people that feel like sales is not for them, or feel like they're not served by anything, in terms of negotiation or sales, or just feel icky anytime they have to negotiate something. Just give it a read. It'll surprise you in some of the things that it'll unearth within you, and maybe you'll take on some new perspectives because of that.
Awesome. Well, we're getting short here on time. So I wanted to ask you one last question, and that's, you talked about the last 2 years kind of coming into your own now. Over the next 2 years, what's something that you're excited about?
So I've, been continually reading more and putting more into my self-development. So I'm excited to see where my mind frame shifts in the next 2 years, because even just this year, like the person I started off as is not the person I feel like I am today. And I feel like I kind of have those evolutions every 6 months to a year anyways, but since I've kind of refocused it into really ironing out what things are truly me and what things are like trauma related, and just what things are things that I need to knock out and just start doing, right, to improve my life. So I'm excited where that journey is going to end up. And then, I mean, the organization that I'm a part of right now is doing some really exciting things in terms of establishing, zero trust security for enterprises. And I started here in April, and so we're about a 20-person company. And so I'm kind of the engine as the sales engineer that's kind of going to drive us into the future here. So hopefully in 2 years, right? We're double, triple the size, and
Yeah.
and we're having a much different conversation about, what I'm essentially doing, or maybe I'm looking at a director in that time frame. So between the knowledge that I'm looking to attain, and actually I have a certification that I'm trying to get. I have a course and an exam
Okay.
scheduled in January for a CISSP certification that I'm excited for. So just that's honestly, I know I'm going to have some good suits in the next coming years.
Yeah.
So there's
A lot going on, a lot to be excited for.
yeah, of course.
Awesome.
And then maybe eventually, who knows if you meet somebody and some things work out in that time frame, who knows, it can happen in 2 years, but for right now, just keep working on myself and doing those things.
All right. Well, thanks for coming on today. This has been so much fun. Real pleasure.
Same here. I had a lot of fun talking to you, Rich. I appreciate it.
Thanks for listening to Rich Conversations. Again, you can follow Johnny on Instagram at Endo2Dapper. Have a thoughtful and intentional day.